This little tutorial, what I want to do is show you how to do some basic scripting, and then also how to do a little bit with some different types of lighting. And what we're going to do is we're going to add just like a porch light on this, deck area here, and we're going to have it get brighter and dimmer and brighter and dimmer and brighter and dimmer, sort of to add a little bit to the atmosphere. Maybe it's there to indicate to somebody that they need to go check out what's happening here. So something to take the player's eye off the main world and say, look, hey, there's something exciting happening over here. And we can make it, flicker or whatever. We're just going to make it pulse in a nice little pattern so that people can see it going. What I'm going to do is, I don't know if you're going through these in order or not, but I am going to start with this scene and I'm going to duplicate it. So Control D or Command D if you're on a Mac, and then we'll double click and go to our Untitled 2. And then I'm going to run it just to make sure everything is still okay. And yeah, we're still running around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a point light right here. We'll say create light, point light, and here it is. And you can kind of see the radius of where it's going to go. And I think we'll probably just end up sticking it like right here. And color is white, that's fine. Let's just go and run it and see what does it look like. Right now it doesn't look like much, but that's probably because the intensity is down. Let's see. You see that thing? Is it going? And the intensity all the way up. About draw halo. You see where that thing is? There it is. It's way over here. So here's our light. Definitely positioned wrong. And so let's go back to our scene and position that thing right. So however, sometimes it's a little goofy when you're positioning these things because you're in 3D space where it's actually going. Yeah, see, it's actually over there. So I'll grab this blue arrow and take it over here. And down. This. You want to bring it up a little bit. And so yeah, these things can be a little bit tricky to figure out where they're actually going because it's hard. It's hard to tell the depth of where things are at. We need to move this thing out a little more. Let's see, height-wise, should be okay. Let's try that. I'm going to actually move my first-person controller right over to this thing so you can see it. There's our game view. Maybe if I click on this point light, there we go. Now you can see it sort of glowing over in this area. And you can always position it better. But let's run our game, and so we can see as we're over here, I can play with the intensity and make it do this sort of stuff. And what I want to do is I want to go into code and make it go like this all by itself. Because right now I'm doing this slider thing, and that's good, but we don't want our players doing that. We want it to just happen on its own. So that's what we're going to do is we've got our point light in here. We are going to write some code that'll do this all on its own, and that's it. That's what our idea is. So if you haven't written a lot of code before, don't worry about it. Just try to keep up. Type in what I'm typing in, and hopefully at some point it will make sense. So I'm going to right-click and say Create C# script. There's different types of languages that Unity supports. Everything I'm going to do, I think everything we'll do in this class is all C#. So we'll click on the C# script, and it's going to ask us to name this thing, and I will call it Pulse Light. And notice I'm not using spaces. Don't use spaces in your file names for scripts. That's not a good thing to do. And I'll explain why. I'm going to open this thing up. So when this comes up, it sort of made a template program for us. And this is called a class, and that's an object that's going to be attached to our light to tell it to do stuff. And this thing here is the name of the class, pulse light. It also matches the name of the file. Class names cannot have spaces. And so that's why when we created the file name, we said, don't use a space, because the file name and the class name have to be the same, and there's a rule that says class names can't have spaces. So just make sure that you're aware of that. The rest of this stuff we're going to kind of go through here and start filling in some of these stubs. But before we do that, we go back to Unity, and we want this script to control our light. And here is our light over on the left in the hierarchy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this pulse light script onto that object over here in the inspector. So I'll take the pulse light and I'll drag it over here. And now this point light in our scene has a pulse light script. And what that's going to allow us to do is it's going to give us access to all of these other properties of the pulse light, including the intensity, which is the one that we want to play with. Right, so let me go back here. I'm going to create a variable called light and just give it the name L. And what that's going to do is it's going to let us refer to the light object, the light component, this thing, in our script. Okay? This thing is a light. So I call it light. And I give it the name L, which means after we assign it, anywhere in the script, I can just type L instead of typing light. And it'll be much quicker to type some of this stuff out. So first we need to tell it what it is. So L equals get component light. That's it. So we're saying there is a component that's of type light, which is this thing here. And so we say get component light, and then this open and close parentheses, that's just how you call functions, just like this start has open and close parentheses. This has an open close parentheses. I guess for some of you, this is probably the first time you're ever seeing programs. So let me explain what some of this stuff is. So everything in C#, for the most part, starts and ends with a curly brace. So you have your public class pulse light, and it starts with a curly brace and ends with a curly brace. These things, void, start, open and close parentheses, these are function names, and here's a start of the function and here's an end of the function. So start happens as soon as our scene starts running, and anything you want to have happen right away when it first starts running, you put inside of start. Update is another function, and it has a start and an end, and anything that you want to have happen on an update, you put it in here. And an update is something that happens 60 times a second. It's the frame update for as the screen's being redrawn. Because we want to pulse our light, we want to make it from dim to bright to back to dim, we can put our code inside of this update loop, because this is going to get called all the time that we're running. And so if I do something like here and I say L, which is our light, dot, and when you push the dot, you get the properties of whatever your object is. And so all of these things over here, range, color, intensity, all this stuff, these are properties of a light. So L dot intensity, and I'm going to say equals L dot intensity plus 0.01 F. Okay, so we put the F in there to indicate that it's a floating point number. And so what this line of code says is we're going to take our new intensity, it's going to be equal to our current intensity plus 0.01. So add 0.01, which is a number I just grabbed out of the air, because we know it goes from, the intensity goes from 0 to 8. And so I just said, well, let's just do 0.01 so we can see it go. Hopefully that's slow enough. If you made this a 1, it would be, 60 times a second. It's going to add 1 to it, and so it's going to be 8 really, really quickly. So let's just run this and see what happens. Make sure you save it, and then if we hit the go button, is it working? You can see over on the right on the inspector that the intensity is moving all by itself, and then if you look on our balcony, you can see it gradually getting brighter. pretty neat. I think it was going a little bit too slow, so we can change this value right here, happens to be the speed. And one thing that you can do that's pretty cool, if you say public float speed, and I'll say equals 0.01f. So what this is speed is a variable. Anywhere you use speed, it will be replaced with this 0.01f. It's just a lot nicer to type out the word speed as opposed to remembering to type this entire thing out. So I'm going to change this crazy 0.01f and set it to speed down here. And we really didn't make any functional differences. We just gave a better representation of what this thing does. And we also can change it now. If we want it to go twice as fast, we can change 0.01 to a 0.02. And then if we run it, let's see what happens. So now it's getting brighter and brighter and brighter, jumping by 0.02 each time as opposed to 0.01. And another cool thing that happened, because we made this thing public, because we said public float speed, now over here in the inspector we have a area for speed, a property that we can adjust. Just like all this other stuff that just kind of showed up on its own, this stuff is here because we created it. We called it public. And when you call a variable public, it's going to show up in the inspector. And so now I can tweak that speed here. I can make it 0.1 if I want to, and watch and see how fast that goes. Oops. Somehow I set it to 0.1. And we'll run. Now this should go a lot faster. There it goes. All right, so that was pretty cool. But what we need to do is we want it to go all the way up until it is an intensity of 8. That's our max. And then instead of getting brighter, we want it to get dimmer until it gets all the way down to 0. And then we want to bring it brighter again. And so we're going to need to do what's called an if statement. So we will say something like if L.intensity is greater than or equal to 8.0f, we need to do something, right? Because this keeps getting added by speed. So every time we keep adding speed, 0.02, over and over and over again, eventually it's going to get bigger than 8. And when it gets to 8, we don't want it to get brighter anymore because it can't get brighter. That's just the max value that we can have. So we want to start bringing it down back to 0. And because I don't like having these numbers kind of floating around, I'm going to add another variable up here, public float max intensity equals 8.0f, and public float, we'll make a min intensity equals 0.0f. Okay, so I'll change this to max intensity. So when we say an if statement, we'll say if whatever happens in here, then we have our start curly brace and our end curly brace. So if our intensity is bigger than our max intensity, we want to do something. We want it to start going down. And we'll also have something that says if L.intensity is less than or equal to min intensity, we want to do something. Right? So this means that our intensity got below 0. We want our light to pulse. We want it to go from 0 to 8 to 0 to 8 to 0 to 8 to 0 to 8. And these conditions here that we'll put in code here and we'll put in code here tells us that we've hit our minimum or we've hit our maximum and we need to start going the other direction. So one way to do this, and I'll just put it in here, we will say int direction equals 1. And instead of this business here, we'll say speed times direction. All right, so now we're doing math problems, getting kind of out of control. So by default, this direction is a 1. And so when we say speed times direction, it's not going to change it. So this is still just going to keep going up each time. Once we get to our max intensity, we can say direction equals -1. Which means the next time we'll come in here, we'll say our intensity equals our intensity plus our speed, which is 0.02, times our direction, which is now -1. And so we, in a sense, we've started subtracting our intensity each time, which will make our intensity go smaller and smaller and smaller. And then once we get down to 0, we just need to do the opposite and make sure that we start going up again. We'll say direction equals 1. And I'm just kind of cleaning up some of these lines. All right, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. If it doesn't, let it sink in for a while. Well, let's see if it works. If it works, it'll be even better. So we're running. We see our light getting brighter. Now it's getting dimmer. Brighter, dimmer, brighter, dimmer. And, it doesn't matter. We can go walk around wherever we want to go, and, it's still going to keep going. It's not tied to anything that we're doing on the keyboard. It's just getting brighter and dimmer. And you notice there's no, light fixture or anything like that. This is just a ball of light. And so if you wanted to make it look like it was actually coming from some piece of this house, you could have a model of a light fixture or something like that and put this glowing little sphere inside of it. So it looked like it was coming from it. But the way it works right now, that's okay too. Just sort of show that something is happening. And we can change our speed. Right now it's at 0.01. I can drag it up to something a little bit faster. Now it's doing that. We can change our max intensity. Maybe we don't want it to get so bright. Maybe we don't want it to go all the way to 0. We get a nice little flicker effect like that. And so now that we have this basic code in there with these different conditions about max intensity, min intensity, and our speed, we can start going back into Unity and tweaking these values to give it an effect that we want. And then we can use the same script on other lights and have it behave slightly differently. We can make a really long pulse, or however we want to do it. So yeah, so this was just an intro into dropping lights, point lights into a scene in Unity, and then being able to automatically control their intensity by a script. And so it's also served as an intro to scripting if you haven't seen it before. So we did not that many lines of code that are directed towards this light, and we were able to make it do something on its own, which is pretty cool. And we also learned about how to get variables over here by making stuff in our script public. We make them public like this, they show up in here, and then we can tweak them. And a lot of times, developers are going to develop scripts, and somebody else may be using this GUI to build stuff, and so they'll kind of hide some of the code by putting all these different parameters in here that the game designer can actually use without understanding what the code really does. Just like this sort of stuff we've been using up here. We don't really know what happens here, but we know it does something. And so that's how we do this. We hide the code from people by doing it this way. So, yep, so that's the end of that one.